RNZ News at 5. Good afternoon. Ahi Marie. I'm Evie Ashton. The High Court has ruled on the legality of vaccine mandates for both health and education workers, finding them a justified limit on the Bill of Rights. Two groups representing doctors and teachers opposed to the mandate challenged its legality last month. Our political reporter Annika Smith has more.
Justice Cook was asked to consider whether the mandates were a reasonable and demonstrably justified limit on people's rights. In a 55-page decision released this afternoon, the judge found they were justified, with the public benefit of a mandate outweighing any adverse effects. He also explicitly dismissed the applicant's expert evidence that unknown safety concerns relating to the Pfizer vaccine meant mandating it wasn't legal. The ruling follows a judgment in February which found the vaccine mandate for police and defence personnel unlawful.
An international law expert warns Russia's blacklist targeting prominent New Zealanders will likely grow in length. The list bans all 120 MPs, the Governor-General and various defence and intelligence figures from entering Russia. Alexander Gillespie from Waikato University expects other notable New Zealanders will also be included as the conflict continues.
This is not the end of the list, this is probably the beginning of the list. And as the displeasure of both countries grows, the list will be added to in time to come.
Alexander Gillespie says New Zealand should consider expelling lower-level Russian diplomats. The government is seeking feedback on a set of proposals designed to crack down on modern slavery. The potential laws will require all organisations to take action if they become aware of modern slavery or worker exploitation. They'll also require medium-sized and large organisations to disclose the steps they're taking to address exploitation. The Minister for Workplace Relations and Safety, Michael Wood, says the measures will protect vulnerable workers and strengthen trade. Dunedin police say they won't need support from outside the region to end the occupation of the Octagon. A small group have been occupying the central city site since February the 11th, ostensibly in support of the larger protest in the capital. The City Council has given them until Monday to remove tents and other structures or be trespassed. Senior Sergeant Anthony Bond says officers are working with the protesters to ensure they follow the council's directive.
They're allowed to protest as long as it's lawful and peaceful. They're just not allowed the structures to remain in the Octagon area.
Senior Sergeant Bond says an incident in which a child kicked a worker who was there to remove a portaloo remains under investigation. Latest COVID-19 figures show that cases continue to fall nationally, but include the death of a person aged under 20. The Ministry of Health says there are 9,906 new community cases, the lowest number this week. One of the 10 people reported today to have died with COVID was aged between 10 and 19. 2 were in their 40s, 3 each in their 70s and 80s, and 1 person was over 90. The deaths announced today include people who've died during the past 15 days. A Palmerston North real estate agent says the housing market has turned quickly in favour of buyers. The latest QV house price index shows the price of an average home in New Zealand fell 0.6% in the 3 months to the end of March to just over $1 million. Andy Stewart says there are more houses for sale but a lack of first home buyers and investors.
The vendors that are trying to sell now are having to price their property to meet the competition if they want to get it sold. They really need to be a little bit sharper and clever on where they price the property, and the days of them getting the big prices, in fact, are just stopped.
Andy Stewart says the effects of tightened lending rules have kept some people away from the market. To sport, and Tiger Woods has shot a 1-under par 71 on his Masters comeback as the 5-time champion made a dramatic return to competitive golf at Augusta. The 15-time major winner suffered life-threatening injuries in a car crash 14 months ago and feared he might lose a leg.
I'm proud of my whole team. We worked so hard. We got a long way to go. I mean, this is a marathon, and a lot of things can happen. The weather's going to change. The golf course is going to dry out. It's going to get interesting. So, it's nice to get off to a positive start.
South Korea's Im Sung-jae, the runner-up in 2020, leads with a 5-under 67. The football Ferns haven't had a win against Australia since 1994, but they have 2 opportunities to get the better of the Matildas over the next 5 days. Both teams have struggled in recent international competitions, with the football Ferns finishing their last tournament in February without a win. Coach Jitka Klimkova says she's starting to see improvements and has targeted areas to work on against the Australians in Game 1 tonight at Townsville.
One of the work on for us and our goal for this tour is to get better with our flank defending, specifically in our middle third and defensive third.
The Magic have had to pull out of this weekend's ANZ Premiership netball matches due to COVID, meaning games against the Steel and the Stars will be rescheduled. COVID has now forced the postponement of 7 games. And Ferrari's Carlos Sainz has topped the timesheets in the first practice session at the Australian Grand Prix in Melbourne. That's the news.
Tomorrow morning, keeping track of the new variants of the ever-inventive COVID. Wondering how Amazon's going to cope with its first US union. Rewriting the prevailing theory about the origins of life on Earth. And becoming the first Westerner to see a rare parasitic plant, the name of which might be Rafflesia bana-owana. Call Kim Hillaho. Join me tomorrow morning just after 8 on RNZ National.
You're with Lisa Owen on Checkpoint next. Right now, the short forecast from Met Service to midnight Saturday. For Northland, Auckland, Coromandel and the Bay of Plenty, mainly fine. There's the odd shower in Northland and the Coromandel tomorrow evening. From Waikato to Manawatu, including the central high country, cloud and a few showers are spreading north, clearing this evening. It's going to be fine tomorrow. From Gisborne to Wairarapa, also for Wellington and Horowhenua Kapiti Coast, fine today, partly cloudy tomorrow with isolated showers for the eastern regions. Partly cloudy for Bulla and Westland with isolated showers in Bulla, clearing to fine everywhere tonight, but returning there tomorrow afternoon. For Nelson, Marlborough, Canterbury and North and Central Otago, fine. A few showers about North Canterbury and the Kokoda district this evening, clearing early tomorrow. Cloudy periods for Dunedin, Clutha, Southland and Fiordland with isolated showers retreating to the south coast tomorrow. And for Te Kohu, the Chatham Islands, showers turning to rain for a time this evening, possibly heavy with hail. The time is 7 minutes past 5. I'll have news headlines for you at 5:30.
Nā mihi Evie, tēnā koutou katoa, no mai haere mai ki Checkpoint I tēnei rā, ko Lisa Owen tēnei. The government is putting the onus on businesses to do their bit to stamp out modern slavery. It's proposing a new law which would force companies to take action if their products are linked to forced labour. Experts say it fills a gap in our legislation and the new regulations could be tougher than comparative laws overseas. But exactly how it will work and what penalties there will be in store for non-compliant businesses remains unclear. Katie Todd reports.
Modern slavery is an issue that World Vision's head of advocacy, Rebecca Armstrong, thinks we're too good at glossing over.
New Zealand often thinks it doesn't have a modern slavery problem, but the fact is that we do. World Vision carried out research last year that showed that a lot of our imports are linked to modern slavery in New Zealand. So we found out that the average Kiwi family spends around $34 per week on products associated with modern slavery. And these are products like shoes, clothes, bananas, coffee, cocoa.
Now the government's unveiled a proposal to make sure local businesses aren't contributing to the problem. It plans to make all companies report any modern slavery or worker exploitation they find out about within their supply chain. Medium to large businesses would also have to declare what they're doing to remedy modern slavery and worker exploitation, while large businesses will have to undertake due diligence to prevent and mitigate it. Minister for Workplace Relations and Safety Michael Wood says it's about treating people fairly.
Well, what it means is that people in the New Zealand supply chain have a positive obligation not to turn a blind eye to credible and serious information that is before them about conditions of modern slavery in their supply chain.
The announcement comes after a petition was presented to Parliament last year asking the government to enact modern slavery laws like the UK and Australia have done. It was signed by 37,000 people. Some of the signatories noted the problem happens here in our own backyard. with up to 3,000 people working in conditions that could be described as modern slavery, according to a 2020 report by the Walk Free Foundation. But the petition also asked the government to consider supply chains and products sourced internationally. According to Nicholas Swan, a senior associate from law firm Chapman Tripp, the proposals unveiled today are even tougher than the rules other countries have introduced. It could mean a bit of paperwork for businesses.
Requiring mandatory due diligence as opposed to just requiring reporting on steps taken within the company's own discretion is a fairly significant step, and one that will require those larger companies to really consider how they would go about that mandatory due diligence, and there will be a real time cost to the businesses.
Business leader Rob Fife, who's been chairing the advisory group for the government, says shoppers might also notice a difference. He says the crackdown could stop some products coming into Aotearoa, but it will also give consumers more transparency about where their purchases come from.
The challenge for consumers is they today have no easy way to find what's going on in the supply chains and the clothes we're all wearing today. So this regime will help bring that information to the fore.
It's not yet clear what the penalties could be for businesses that don't do their bit, or how the government will monitor compliance. That's for the public to make submissions on before the proposals become law. World Vision's Rebecca Armstrong knows what she'd like to see.
A really specialised department that's separate from government who's regulating and monitoring this, and something like an anti-slavery commissioner should be considered.
Consultation on the proposals has opened today. Submissions can be made for the next 2 months.
Well, Trade Aid is all about sustainable trade, fair prices, wages and working conditions, and it's on the government's Modern Slavery Advisory Group. Its CEO, Jeff White, is adamant new legislation is needed to stamp out slavery and exploitation.
The rest of the world's moving in this direction, and it's time that New Zealand did as well.
How easy would it be to enforce?
Well, we don't know that yet, but there is an element of self-reflection from the businesses that they have to look at their supply chain. So it's not like it's imposed down from the government. It's up to businesses themselves, and the reliance is on them to do it.
If it is about self-monitoring, then why do you need the legislation? If you're relying on them to monitor themselves, they could do that voluntarily now.
Yeah, but that doesn't happen. We have slave goods coming into this country. We have slavery actually occurring within the country. And so it does require legislation for the government to draw a line in the sand and say, hey, this isn't acceptable. And it also allows businesses that are doing it and doing it properly not to be undermined by those that aren't.
How many so-called slave goods do you reckon are coming into this country?
Oh, there's a lot. World Vision put out some figures on that the other day, and I think I'd have to query these figures, but it's about $30,000 each person spends a year on product that comes through slave goods. If you're buying chocolate, diamonds, cell phones, there's slavery within those supply chains.
So every Kiwi potentially is buying thousands of dollars worth of goods that have been produced in terrible, terrible circumstances?
Absolutely.
So if we bring in legislation like this, how do you monitor it when the operations that you're talking about are offshore?
Well, that's a requirement. I mean, the public doesn't want to unknowingly be participants in slavery, and that's what's happening at the moment. And what it is businesses have to look at it, they're required to look at it, and there are fines if they don't. I think that's a big part of it. What they've found overseas with legislation where they haven't got fines involved is the businesses simply don't do anything about it. But in New Zealand, it looks like our legislation will have fines, and those overseas who haven't are re-looking at theirs to realise they've gone wrong with that. And so I think when you start to introduce that, then businesses get a lot more serious about it.
Yeah, one of the things that the government is specifically asking people to comment on is whether companies should be required to remedy harms they have caused or contributed to. So what might that look like? Back-paying wages, for example?
Well, it could be that. I mean, it really depends on the supply chain itself, where that's occurred, and how involved New Zealand businesses are in it. Sometimes they're directly involved in it, and other times they're 3 businesses down the line from where that occurred. And so I think that's going to have to be looked at a little bit further.
And Jeff, that's what makes it complicated, doesn't it? You've just illustrated how difficult it is.
Yeah, it is difficult, and this is what's happened with modern globalisation and modern supply chains, that people can look the other way and say, well, I'm only involved in this portion of the supply chain, I don't control the rest, I can therefore turn a blind eye to it. Our argument is, and certainly Trade Aid's argument is, that's not good enough. You cannot be a participant in slavery, and you've got to look down that supply chain, and if you see it, you've got to exit yourself. And if you can't change it and cure it, you've got to get out of that supply chain and form another one. There are other ones out there, and what the legislation does, it allows those businesses who are willing to do that and who are already doing it not to be penalised and undercut by those businesses who aren't.
If you are worried by some New Zealand firms who are trading enslaved products, right, when comes the time when you start naming and shaming?
Well, I think we get this legislation in place. I think that's the first thing. And our first recourse would be to sit down with these people and say, okay, there's legislation here. We know there's slavery in your supply chain. You need to do something about it. At the moment, from our perspective, it's industry by industry. We know the industries that have have slavery in that supply chain. So
which industries, Jeff, would be the main concerns?
The main concerns would be around diamonds and gold and chocolate, clothing. There's quite a number. There's not many that aren't, to be honest. But agriculture is a big one as well, and also it's the countries that they come from that we can identify as well, where we know that there's a huge amount of slavery within those countries. If it's dirt cheap, Jeff, does that mean it's dodgy? You would have to think so. Slavery exists because people don't want to pay someone a fair wage. That's what it comes back to. And child slaves are in there because they don't even want to pay someone a poor adult wage. So at the heart of slavery is people aren't paying the right price for the product. And that's part of the problem as well. Some people cannot afford to pay more for the product. Would you accept that? No, I don't accept that. I don't accept that because what are they going to say? I'm willing to put someone else in slavery because of that. I think there are other answers than that because the price of the product's not likely to change because there's massive profits, absolutely massive profits in slavery. And so what we're saying is take those profits out from those people that are profiteering from slavery and the price won't change that much. And that's Jeff White from Trade Aid. Homai o Whakaaro would really love your feedback on this one. Nō reira anei na kaupapa mō te hōtaka nei. Let us know what you think about price versus ethics. Do you just choose the cheapest or do you check where and how it was made? And how often do you do that? Could you go through your cupboards now and work it out? Text me, Pātui Mai 2101, tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ, or you can email checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. Water you wouldn't even drink after boiling it. The Canterbury town fed up with the state of their water. National Party leader Christopher Luxon was in Canterbury today promising to repeal the government's Three Waters legislation. He's knocked up a billboard in Waimakariri advertising the party's pledge to unwind the laws, which have faced considerable opposition. But people in a town fed up with dirty drinking water just want anyone, to fix the problem. Jean Edwards reports.
In the Canterbury town of Springfield at the foot of the Southern Alps, water the colour of weak tea runs from the taps. This man and his family, who didn't want to be named, have been drinking bottled water for months.
You wouldn't boil it and drink it, it still remains tea-coloured. We've been drinking out of plastic bottles for months. You have to go down to the tanker in Springfield and fill them up out of the same tap 300 odd people are using, and with no sanitiser there.
He's also worried about bathing his son.
If you run a bath, it ends up looking tea-coloured and you end up with a rash if you have a bath and don't shower after and rinse it all off.
Some people have been showering at the community hall, but he's not keen.
I think it's a bit too humiliating and pretty uncomfortable, really. It's pretty cold up in this region and it's parked right next to the main highway. You've got all of State Highway 73 traffic going to the west coast, driving straight past your shower block, and it's pretty dehumanising, really.
Springfield's water supply is drawn from the Kauai River, but the Selwyn District Council says a slip during flooding last year means it gets too stirred up to treat after heavy rain. Some in the town across the council opposes the Three Waters reforms when it's been almost a year since they had a reliable source of safe drinking water. National Party leader Christopher Luxon has knocked up a billboard in the neighbouring Waimakariri district pledging to repeal the legislation if it wins the next election. He says a one-size-fits-all approach wouldn't help.
The residents need to hold the council to account, and the council then can go off and do something about that. But I can tell you, in a big mega entity with 22 representing 22 different district councils, trying to find the person who will pick up the phone to be able to listen to that complaint and to be able to do something about it will be impossible.
Mr Luxon hasn't said how much it might cost to unwind the legislation, but he says it should be easy.
This is a government that doesn't get things done. It likes to talk a lot, but it actually doesn't follow through and get things done. And so I think by the time we get there in 2023, the reality is that not much will have happened, to be brutally honest with you. So I think it's going to be very easy for us to repeal and unwind.
The Selwyn District Council says it's working to fix the complex water problem in Springfield. It's building extra reservoir storage, trialling a membrane plant to better filter the water and searching for alternative sources.
It is 5:20. Kia mau tonu mai. Stay with us. You're listening to Checkpoint on RNZ National. The government's given a cash injection to the country's largest medicinal cannabis grower, saying it could become as successful as the wine industry. Puro is a specialist cannabis grower near Blenheim and today was given a $32 million grant. The minister says it's the perfect time to grow the high-value industry. Our reporter Tessa Guest and cameraman Nate McKinnon have the story.
On the coast just north of Kaikoura sits the largest cannabis farm in the country. 51,000 plants stretch across a vast field, about 1 metre in height. A 2-week harvest is just kicking off. It will be the largest cannabis harvest ever to take place in New Zealand.
Projects that come to us, some of them are weird and wacky, wild, but we welcome those.
Agriculture Minister Damien O'Connor says the grant will kickstart the organic medicinal cannabis industry in New Zealand.
As we saw in the Bay of Plenty, dairy farms became kiwifruit orchards, sheep and beef farms have become hop orchards. There's a lot changing. A lot of the new generation coming into agriculture are excited by the potential opportunities around the world.
Mr O'Connor says one of the main reasons for the investment is to diversify the agriculture industry to combat climate change. He says it's part of a program that will provide information for anyone else entering the industry.
Part of the agreement here was that we would contribute, $13 million from the taxpayer on the basis that the wider industry gets the chance to learn the lessons from this program over 5 years.
Cultivation Director Tom Forrest has worked internationally growing cannabis and says there's no better place to grow it.
This is a truly breathtaking site. We have the turquoise water with the seals down on the beach, the snow-capped mountains in the background. And as an agronomist and a plant scientist, it's a truly pristine environment to cultivate high-grade medicinal cannabis.
Farm owner and co-founder of Puro, Sank McFarlane, says the new venture has been significant for his family.
We've been here for about 5 or 6 generations. It's really exciting. It's a significant step forward for the family, and we've just been really excited to be able to get out and put back into the farm.
The seedlings were first planted 2 years ago and are regrown every year. After they're harvested, they're hung inside to dry for up to 10 days in humid conditions. The leaves are then trimmed to leave only the most potent part of the plant before it's packaged and sent throughout New Zealand and internationally. CEO of Hulius Therapeutics Carmen Doran is partnering with Puro to distribute the cannabis and says it's sent to a wide variety of pharmacies across the country.
Most of the products that we have in market already in New Zealand are products that are taken orally, and those products are prescribed by a doctor and available from a pharmacist. So right now you can go to your doctor and get products, medicinal cannabis products that are New Zealand made, and that's a really exciting thing for our patients here.
Medicinal cannabis was legalised in 2017. A referendum to legalise cannabis for recreational use narrowly failed to pass in 2020.
Are you plagued by those dodgy texts that want you to click on an even dodgier link? Now, you know the ones. We've got a parcel for you. It's your bank with an urgent message. Click here. No, don't click. Now, one of Aussie's biggest telcos is taking the guesswork out of it, introducing a filter to block the scam messages before they reach your mobile. Narelle Devine, the Chief Information Security Officer, joins us now from Telstra. Hi, Narelle.
Good afternoon.
Is this new technology or is it already being used by other companies?
It's not new technology. We use an off-the-shelf commercial solution by a specialist provider, but there are a few of them out there on the market that we've decided to put into our network.
Yeah, why are you doing it now?
So we've seen an incredible uptick in SMS scams, and I'm sure everybody out there would see the same things. We saw just in Telstra alone last year, SMS scam reports were approximately 11,000 for Android devices. That was up from just 50 the year before. So we can see such an increased spike that we know that the scammers will move, and we'd already implemented some telephone blocking for scam calls. We always knew they'd move to SMS, so we started working on this some time ago.
Yeah, and so in basic terms, how does it actually work?
Look, it's really machine learning that looks for patterns and it looks for those links or known telephone numbers that we're able to then block at scale.
Yeah, so it scoops up the messages somewhere, does it? Like sending it to your trash box, but text messages instead of your emails.
That's right, and it doesn't go to a trash box. It just never reaches your mobile phone. So for our customers, it's an amazing leap forward where they just don't get annoyed by those scam messages anymore.
You've been trialling this, as I understand it. So how accurate is it? Does it always get the right messages?
Yeah, look, it's proved to be very accurate, and we've been trialling it for 3 months now with about 2,500 of our own staff. And we're seeing it being incredibly effective. Of course, it won't capture everything, so everybody still does need to be on their toes. And, if it looks too good to be true, it probably is.
Yeah, and these people are adaptable, right? Scammers tend to be adaptable. So are you expecting them to come back with something that kind of is a workaround and you have to go at it again? It's like whack-a-mole.
Yeah, we absolutely are. We know they'll move, and the key is for us to try and anticipate as best we can, and then we also need to keep our machine learning really on point so that we can follow them as they do move.
How many customers does this affect in your neck of the woods?
Oh, so for us, it's tens of millions. So it's a lot, and it's not just for Telstra customers in Australia. It's also for other providers that use Telstra as their backhaul.
Right. So with this technology, and do you know if this technology is being used in New Zealand?
I don't know if it's being used by the New Zealand carriers. We know it's being used internationally, particularly in Europe, and we do collaborate internationally with telcos. We also talk to the other Australian telcos. We're always sharing information of this type. I mean, it's just good for everybody to stay safe.
And is it being used right now across your customers, or when is the rollout expected?
Yep, no, it has been switched on, so it is now working for all of our customers.
Really appreciate your time, Narelle. Thanks for joining us. That is Narelle Devine, who's the Chief Information Security Officer with Telstra. And let us know what you reckon about that. 2101, how frequently do you get those sorts of dodgy texts that require you to, click onto a link and send you somewhere else? I got one the other day saying someone's about to take a large amount of money from your bank account. Click on this link to stop them. Nah. Okay, getting a lot of feedback here on slavery. This person says a small client of ours had to join SEDEX, not cheap, I'm not sure what that is, to sell to Australian customers. It self-monitors all that stuff already. Interesting. Stephen says, your previous guest will need to expand on what part of the cell phone supply chain process bears a slavery component. I know he talked about electronic parts, so I'm not specifically sure on that one, Stephen. Good question. It's like climate change, reckons Paul. Our immediate lifestyle wants outweigh other people's suffering, both present and future. Pat says there are lots of good fair trade goods out there, bananas, coffee, chocolate. Let's get rid of the goods made using a slave labour. And Jan says, buy second-hand, everything except food. You will never run out. If it is still in good condition, it's probably made from a quality product. And Tim's got in touch from Upper Hutt, and he says, should we trade with China then? Some Chinese firms, Tim says, pay very low wages, no unions, etc. Some even use slave labour from prisons, which may include Uyghurs. China also keeps its currency artificially low to undercut other countries. Well, let us know your thoughts on that. You can text us on 2101, tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ, or email checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. E te iwi e haere aki nei e Checkpoint, how the long tail of COVID continues to sting workers. The millions of dollars in yacht maintenance potentially sailing away, and Dan Carter is kicking it still at Eden Park, all in the name of charity. We'll check in with him a little later. Don't forget to send us your feedback, homai o whakaaro. We would love to hear from you. Usual channels, text 2101, tweet at Checkpoint RNZ, email address checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. It is time now for the headlines. Ko Evie anō tēnei.
A legal expert says a new plan to tackle modern slavery will put pressure on businesses. The government wants companies to report any modern slavery in their supply chain, and for medium and large businesses to declare what they're doing about exploitation. Chapman Tripp Senior Associate Nicholas Swan says New Zealand is going even further than those countries, the UK and other countries, by requiring large companies to carry out due diligence. Trade Aid is on the government's Modern Slavery Advisory Group. Its CEO, Jeff White, told Checkpoint that every New Zealander is buying thousands of dollars of goods produced in terrible conditions. He says the legislation draws a line in the sand and means businesses acting legitimately aren't undermined by the practice of others. The High Court has ruled on the legality of vaccine mandates for both health and education workers, finding them a justified limit on the Bill of Rights. Two groups representing doctors and teachers opposed to the mandate challenged its legality last month. Latest COVID-19 figures show that cases continue to fall nationally, but include the death of a person aged under 20. The Ministry of Health says there are 9,906 new community cases, the lowest number this week. Dunedin's Mayor, Aaron Hawkins, hopes the occupation of the city's Octagon will end without a confrontation. A small group have been occupying the central city site since February the 11th, ostensibly in support of the larger anti-mandate protest in the capital. The Dunedin City Council has given the group until Monday to remove tents and other structures, or trespass orders will be issued. And Ukraine President Volodymyr Zelensky says Ukrainian forces have started to go through ruined buildings in the town of Borodyanka. He's warning the destruction there by Russian troops is worse than that inflicted on the nearby town of Bucha, where there's evidence of atrocities against civilians. Those are the headlines. We'll have more news and weather for you at 6.
Kia ora rā e hono mai hoki mai. This is Checkpoint. Ko Lisa Owen tēnei. It's time for the business news now. Ko taku hoa e nai nei, ko Nona Peltier. Nona, my food bag is expecting to dish up a strong full-year profit. I see what you did there. What is it forecasting?
Well, they're forecasting an increase of 18% in their underlying profit for the year ending March. That's they're expecting to make $34.2 million. That's up from what they made the year earlier. Sorry, that's $34.2 million is what they're expecting to make, and that's compared with the year earlier. So the revenue is also up 1.7% to $194 million. This really pleased the market today. The share price for my food bag closed up nearly 15% as a result. And they said that they were, I guess, a bit taken aback themselves by how much the demand has continued through not just the first round of COVID lockdowns, but also into the second round. And people are rediscovering, I guess, cooking at home and baking and so forth. And so very popular. And of course, we also had another report that was released today from Westpac talking about how consumers are finding it really difficult. And one of the things they're spending less on are meals out.
Yeah, that's interesting. I wonder, is it because people were locked down, as you mentioned, COVID, or are we just bored with all the same things that we're cooking and we need someone else to come up with fresh ideas for us?
Well, I think some people probably weren't very good cooks to begin with. I mean, come on, you know.
Are you referring to yourself there, Nona?
No, I love cooking. You can tell by looking at me.
Let's move on to the super fun.
Let's do that.
Just let me gather myself after that,
It is Friday afternoon.
Yes.
Come on.
Super fun. Said to be weighing up another big infrastructure investment. What's that about?
Yeah, look, they're looking at Vodafone's cell towers. These are Vodafone owns cell towers, but they're a very expensive piece of infrastructure, possibly worth $1.5 billion. And Vodafone, for some people who might remember, Infratil owns half of Vodafone, and that the news that the Superfund is thinking or perhaps rumored to be up for the sale, the Vodafone sale. It was reported through the Australian Financial Review, and so whether or not they're going to do that, that's not confirmed. But there are a number of other parties interested in them. And, you know, Infratil's share price, because they own all sorts of infrastructure assets, their share price finished up 1.2% today on that. So it remains to be seen whether the Superfund is going to go big on Vodafone's cell towers, because they already announced recently that they were looking at building this huge offshore wind energy project in South Taranaki. So, hey, they must have lots of money for infrastructure, right?
And tell us what numbers you've got from the markets, Nona.
Yeah, well, our market closed down 10 points, and that's really pretty good considering there's been weakness throughout the Asian markets today following Wall Street. So we finished at 12,066. That's our top 50 index. The New Zealand dollar took a bit of a hit, just as a lot of other currencies did, when the U.S. Federal Reserve suggested they were going to be rather aggressive in interest rate hikes. So 68.9 U.S. cents, 92 Australian, and 52.7 British pence.
Thank you, Nona. Ka kite. Have a great weekend. That's Nona Peltier with Business News there. Long COVID sufferers and researchers are calling for urgent support and warning employers to start planning for the possibility that the virus could impact their workforce in ways they have not prepared for. Evidence is mounting that some people suffer debilitating symptoms long after they've contracted COVID-19. While one study here has received funding from the government, others have resorted to crowdfunding to fast-track answers patients desperately need. And as Louise Tanuth reports, financial support is lacking for those unable to work their usual hours.
Daniel Lavender first got COVID in 2020 while working overseas in Shanghai.
A midnight phone call with people banging on the door in hazmat suits, not speaking English, and holding a translator up to me, telling me that I had COVID and I basically needed to get out of the country.
After arriving back home, he lost his job due to cost cutting, which left him looking for work while also battling long COVID symptoms.
Just being incredibly tired, incredibly stressed. I have, 4 instant coffees before I even feel partially alive in the morning, and in each coffee I have 3 heaped huge teaspoons of Moccona strength 8 because a double shot from the coffee machine's not strong enough.
His applications for ACC support and employment benefit were unsuccessful. Complicating things, there's no test for long COVID, which makes it difficult for patients to be heard.
I tell them something and they just look at me starry-eyed and wait for me to finish what I'm saying, whereas I'm sort of telling them something and waiting for them to jump in and come up with a solution. And it's well, there's no one to tell. You just give up telling people because no one knows.
Dan has since started a new career in real estate. With more flexible hours, it's more manageable around symptoms. Dr. Anna Brooks is part of a team of international researchers investigating long COVID and says it's real.
We're calling on all health professionals and all employers to be understanding of this inability to have the magic blood test to tell you that you're experiencing this. These symptoms are very real. It's not something good night's sleep is going to cure, and you can't wish those symptoms away.
She says a scheme similar to the wage subsidy or isolation payment needs to be rolled out for long COVID sufferers or their employers, where full-time work may not be possible.
There's going to be a huge demand for this. There's going to be a huge demand for employees to return to their job. This does come back to a pandemic responsibility. How can we, facilitate people getting back to work and back to work safely?
MSD says someone who has long COVID may be able to apply for job seeker support or supported living payment, but there are criteria to be eligible. ACC says to accept a work-related claim for COVID-19, they need to be satisfied it came from workplace exposure and not community transmission. But Anna Brooks says it could be near impossible to prove you got COVID from your workplace, and instead, support for anyone suffering from long COVID should be available. And many patients are facing pushback at the doctor's office to even get the ball rolling.
Being told that there's nothing wrong with you and that there's nothing you can do and there's nothing wrong with you, and that's really distressing because it'll perpetuate the ongoing problems by being not believed.
But businesses equally stumped when it comes to planning for long COVID. With many businesses returning to normal when the orange traffic light turns on, CEO of Business New Zealand, Kirk Hope, says businesses will do all they can, but there's a lack of information on how to support their staff.
There isn't guidance around about long COVID at the moment, but it's certainly something that employers probably need to be mindful of, particularly if you see people's sick leave balances dwindle as we get through COVID and when other forms of payment are removed.
The Minister of COVID-19 Response, Chris Hipkins, says they're still looking at the evidence.
We obviously keep all of that under review. There is some support available already, but the evidence there is still emerging.
But Green Party co-leader Marama Davidson wants to see more done.
We don't think it's fair that their lives should be made even worse because of something that is outside of their control. So yes, we've been really clear. We want to see more support for workers, absolutely, and things like having to use up their own sick leave first and their own holiday leave for long COVID leave, we don't think is going to lead to long-term good outcomes for anybody.
The Ministry of Health says it's establishing an advisory group on long COVID, monitoring treatments and research gaps and updating evidence. But there's no indication on when we'll see some answers. In the meantime, researchers like Anna are working as hard as they can with the funding they have.
We're used to applying for grants, but it just takes too long in the context of urgency when so many people are needing answers now. That's why we went crowdfunding, because we're channeling the urgency of the patient voice. However, we do know that we've got strong leads on being able to develop diagnostic testing, and so that's an area that could get urgent funding.
For long COVID sufferers like Daniel Lavender, that funding couldn't come soon enough.
All Black legend Dan Carter is closing in on his goal-kicking target for charity at Eden Park. The former First Five is attempting to land 1,598 goal kicks to raise money for UNICEF. Our reporter Nick Trubridge joins me now from Eden Park. Nick, so how is he going?
Hey Lisa, yeah, he's not far off actually. I'm just looking over at the board at the moment. He's about 66 successful kicks to go. Of course, they have to be successful. The sun's going down over Eden Park, but Dan's still here. I'm dressed for the occasion. For people who are listening on the radio and not watching, I'm footy on the bottom, I guess you could say, and formal on top. But enough about me. We've got Dan here. He, as I say, he's 66 away. How's the body? We're coming up 24 hours.
It's good. I've got a wee adrenaline hit actually. I'm going into almost my last hour. I always wanted to kick 66 kicks an hour. One more session to go, 66 kicks. I cannot fail from here. Come on, imagine doing all this work and then pulling a hammy or something. So, mate, seriously, these donations on the board are really driving me over these last couple of hours.
Yeah, we've seen a few come in. I mean, Ali Williams, Corey Flynn, a few familiar names, and all to a pretty important cause. I was watching one of your ads on TV this morning. Tell us about what it really is all about, because there's the kicking, there's the glitz, there's the cameras, but what is it all about for you, Dan?
Yes, it's a WASH program, a UNICEF WASH program, which stands for Water, Sanitation and Hygiene, where UNICEF provide those things to children in the Pacific. You know, the fact that a third of children do not have access to good sanitation facilities in the Pacific. The fact that 1 in 10 children don't have access to clean drinking water. Also, children under 5. one of the leading causes of death for children under 5 are sort of hygiene-related diseases. It's really, really sad. Something we just take for granted here in New Zealand. I know my kids do. So the more donations that we can get, dancarter.com/kick-a-thon, I know can really make an impact to these children.
Yeah, because how did you get onto this? Because, I mean, you look at some of the numbers, and again, you've spoken about them on the TV and stuff like that. I think you said Solomon Islands, for argument's sake, 30% of schools, only 30% of schools have drinking water that is able to be consumed. What was your reaction when you saw these numbers? They're pretty shocking, some of them, and we're right next to these people. They're our Pacific neighbours.
Exactly. I've been lucky enough to be an ambassador for UNICEF for about 7 years, and I've seen the incredible work they do all over the world. I've been to a Syrian refugee camp in Jordan and saw firsthand just how important the work UNICEF are doing. So when I set up the DC10 Fund and partnered with UNICEF, I wanted to do projects I'm passionate about, and the projects are obviously helping support our tamariki here in New Zealand, which is a new initiative that we're looking to explore, but also our neighbouring brother and sisters, the Pacific Islands. When I started learning about the work that UNICEF are doing there and the need for simple things like clean water, sanitation, better sanitation facilities and hygiene facilities, it was just a no-brainer to start there, help these children of the Pacific get the best start to life as possible.
Yeah, absolutely. It's just under 1,600 kicks when it's all said and done. How are you getting through? What are you eating? How often are you resting? Run us through the process, I suppose.
It's got quite a routine running. There's a certain amount of calories at certain stages through the event. Every 3 hours I'm eating a 300 calorie meal. Every 6 hours I'm eating an 800 calorie meal and snacking all the way in between. Energy levels feel good. Some great people around that have really inspired me to keep going. We've already talked about the generous people donating, but when it does come down to it, I often think about the impact that we can have on those children in Pacific, and it's just really spurring me on. So we're almost 23 hours into it, 1 hour to go. We're on the final stretch, and yeah, bloody excited. Still having fun, which is the main thing.
Have you slept at all?
No, but 4 young children, you kind of get used to sleep deprivation. They'll be training for this for the last 8 years. But no, it was some. I thought it was going to be a lot tougher, but I just had some really good friends coming in. Music has been a big part.
Yeah, sort of boogieing to the team.
Well, exactly, yeah. So there's some great DJs and friends coming in to keep the vibe going. And yeah, it's my last set of kicks. I kind of was just kicking. Felt like a bit of a robot, but I was actually going, mate, this is actually really cool. It's something much bigger than me that we're creating here, and the fact that the whole country has got in behind this just makes me really, really proud.
Hey, what's next?
I really want to get to the islands and actually see firsthand where the money is going to be going and the difference that these donations are going to have. I would have loved to go there before the event, but obviously with restrictions, travel restrictions, I haven't been able to. So once I catch up on some sleep, spend a bit of family time, I'm really keen to try and explore getting over to the Pacific and actually seeing the WASH program in hand and the impact that these donations are going to be having.
Hey, can you run us through your technique? You're left-footed, so you go lefty, and I'll try copy it on the right. Can we do that?
Yeah.
So this would be 1-5-3-3 that Dan's attempting at the moment. I'm going to jump out of the way, Lisa. For people who are listening and not watching.
Part of the ball. Yeah, kicking the ball, the sweet spot right here. So
that's sort of the foot of the ball, I suppose you would say, isn't it?
Yeah, the foot, sweet spot. So I lean it forward slightly just to open that up, and I'll make sure the seam's in line where I want to target. I can't believe I'm doing this because I've actually spent the last 24 hours young kids and volunteers doing it for me. So just about put my back out.
Finally setting one up.
Yeah,
well, it's a real danger.
Exactly. So
all right. Well, Dan's going to fire away on this one. So this is for 1-5-3-3. We're good. Go for it. Straight through the middle. And this won't count. No, we'll keep it on so we get the connection. Yeah.
Nick.
So again, for those people, hang on. Yeah. Sorry, Lisa.
Ask him what's hurting the most. I want to know. Is it his backside, his legs, what?
Okay. Sorry, one more request, Dan, before I attempt this kick. What's hurting the most? the glutes?
No, it's actually the last couple of hours. I haven't been stretching as much as I wanted because it's been quite social. I've had my family down here. I've had a lot of commercial partners, so a lot of interacting. I haven't been able to sneak away and do my stretching sessions, so my quad has started to tighten up. But I just spent the last hour, the last 66 kicks, pretty much all off my wrong foot.
Right.
So I'm nice and fresh and ready to go for this last hour.
Rotating the feet.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
that's the key.
Hey, I haven't kicked a goal ever, and I don't play sports. So I'll line this
Not
up for
true.
those
You play
listening, not
netball.
watching. I'm about to attempt. It won't actually count as 1, 5, 3, 4, but I'm about to attempt one anyway. So I'm going to have like a sort of a bit of a run up, sort of Happy Gilmore style, and follow through. Oh. It was, for those listening and not watching at home, it went straight through the middle, straight over the bar. I think that should count for 1, 5, 3, 4. No, I'm just kidding. It missed by a mile. Hey, that's us here, Lisa. As I said, he's now got 65 to go. 65 to go, and then he's done.
Nick.
What an achievement. 24 hours, and the most impressive thing to me is no sleep.
Yeah, amazing. And he could still string a sentence together, which is pretty tough going when you've had zero sleep. But as he said, in practice with the kids. Before you go, I'm sorry, could Nick, the other Nick, please pull back a little bit so we can see the formal versus footy one more time, please. And I really think you're undoing is the socks. Yeah. It's the socks, mate. Are those...
These are great. These are my running socks.
Are they?
These are my orange running socks. I think they're quite... They sort of accentuate the rest of the figure. They accentuate the leg, these lovely bronzed legs.
They are truly striking, and I do love the blazer and the very sporty shorts. Nick, wonderful. Keep practising the kick. And that is Nick Trubridge, who was live at Eden Park with Dan Carter. It is 10 minutes to 6. Now, the Kremlin has released a blacklist of prominent New Zealanders, including the Prime Minister, banning them from entering Russia. Along with Jacinda Ardern, the list includes all MPs, the Governor-General and various Defence Force and intelligence figures. A translated statement published online condemns Cabinet Ministers for pursuing what it calls a Russia-phobic course in line with other Western nations. An international law expert, Alexander Gillespie from Waikato University, expects other notable New Zealanders will be targeted as the conflict continues.
This is not the end of the list, this is probably the beginning of the list. And as the displeasure of both countries grows, the list will be added to in time to come.
Russia's actions come in response to fresh sanctions introduced by the government this week, including a 35% tariff on Russian imports. New Zealand has also banned Vladimir Putin and some of his key supporters from coming here. Meanwhile, Ukraine is warning Russia is about to renew an attempt to take the capital, Kiev. For now, Moscow is focusing attention on the eastern Donbass region. Hundreds of thousands of civilians have been fleeing the area where separatists have been fighting for 8 years. The BBC's Jonathan Beale has more.
21st century combat on Ukraine's eastern front can look and sound more like something from the First World War. But they've been fighting Russian-backed separatists this way for the past 8 years. Western officials say this is where Ukraine has some of its best trained and most battle-hardened troops. They're certainly not all young. From his dugout, 52-year-old Anatoly says he can already see Russian troops just 500 metres away.
If they try to take this position, I'll kill them. If I don't kill them, they'll kill me. Those are the rules of war.
They know their enemy can be brutal. They've had little rest from the fighting. They can already hear the Russian artillery getting closer. But they say morale is high.
Without trenches to defend from, we would all die. But these trenches will protect us.
As you can see, they're well dug in here. Very different from the fighting that you've seen in Kyiv, in urban areas. Both sides well dug in. Easier to defend, but of course the Russians have significant firepower, and we know they're bringing more too. The mass exodus of civilians from eastern Ukraine is already underway. This a 50-mile tailback of traffic heading west. The Donbass is emptying fast. We entered the town of Lysychansk, already being targeted by Russian artillery. See some smoke in the distance rising. Now a ghost town. This was a children's centre. Books and clothes now strewn amongst the rubble. But down in the basement we found a few seeking shelter. The poor, the frail and the old. Even before this war started, Russian-backed separatists were occupying part of the Donbass. And it soon became apparent that pro-Russian sentiment hasn't died here, despite their bombs.
I'm sorry, but it is my understanding that this land was sold. They are destroying our Donbass to give the land away to the Americans. The Americans bought it to place their nuclear weapons here.
Back above ground, we did find one woman, Valentina, who did blame President Putin for the destruction of her town.
Putin is to blame for the war. He gathered this army here. Why did he do this? But our guys did nothing. They said they were exercising.
The Russian offensive around the capital, Kyiv, may have failed, but here in the Donbass, they're slowly taking ground. Waging war by artillery, their tactics still seem the same. And once again, it's Ukraine's civilian population that's likely to suffer most.
Now, just very quickly, someone has emailed us asking how much has Dan Carter raised so far. They want to know about the kick-a-thon. Thank you, Sally, for getting in touch. I am told so far the total sits at approximately $313,000. $313,000 with some time to go. For the first time in US history, a black woman is set to become a Supreme Court judge. The Senate has confirmed President Biden's nominee, Ketanji Brown Jackson's appointment by 53 votes to 47. We'll watch as Polina Lau reports.
On this vote, the yeas are 53, the nays are 47, and this nomination is confirmed.
A standing ovation and applause ringing out from the Senate chamber in Washington, D.C. Ketanji Brown Jackson will be the first black woman to serve on the US Supreme Court, the highest court in the land. Ms. Jackson and President Joe Biden watching the confirmation from the Roosevelt Room of the White House.
And this nomination is confirmed.
All right. Okay. Congratulations.
The newly confirmed justice clasping her hands and holding back tears. Joe Biden later tweeted, "We've taken another step toward making our highest court reflect the diversity of America." Mr. Biden had made an election campaign promise that his first nominee to the Supreme Court would be an African American woman. Vice President Kamala Harris says it's an extraordinary day.
I think it's a very important statement today about who we are as a nation, that we put Judge Ketanji Brown Jackson on the highest court of our land.
All 50 Democratic senators and 3 Republicans voted for Ms. Jackson. It's a significant bipartisan win for the Democrats and the president at a time when inflation is soaring and with the crisis in Ukraine. Ms. Jackson has also been welcomed by the Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer.
People sometimes talk about standing on the shoulder of giants. Well, Judge Jackson will go down in history as an American giant upon whose shoulders others will stand tall.
Chairman of the Senate Judiciary Committee, Dick Durbin, had this to say.
And she really made the case that to be the first, you have to be the best.
Ms. Jackson will be sworn in after Justice Stephen Breyer retires at the end of the current Supreme Court term, around end of June or early July. Her appointment is a milestone for the court, but it won't change the ideological balance of the court, which currently has a 6-3 Conservative majority. The Supreme Court is preparing to make landmark decisions on abortion rights, gun control and religious liberty later in the year.
France's far-right presidential contender Marine Le Pen has held her final rally before the first round of the vote on Monday. She's urging supporters to turn out in force at the polls in order to oust President Emmanuel Macron. Opinion polls suggest Ms Le Pen has seen a surge in support in recent days, while the president's ratings have been falling. The BBC's Hugh Schofield reports from the rally.
What looked like an open and shut election with Emmanuel Macron all but assured of a second term is now wide open, with the opinion polls all showing the distance between him and Marine Le Pen narrowing to a very small margin. The leader of the far-right National Rally knows that there is a momentum behind her while the president is stalling, and so it was in confident form that she appeared before a noisy crowd of supporters in this convention centre in Perpignan, urging her electorate, not always the most reliable of voters, to be sure to turn out on Sunday. She said it was a historic opportunity to usher in a new era.
Everyone who has been in power, they have all failed. So, to all the French, I ask this question: how about trying something new?
There's a strong showing too in the polls for the far-left candidate, Jean-Luc Mélenchon, but the most likely result from the multi-candidate first round on Sunday is once again, as in 2017, a Marine Le Pen, Emmanuel Macron runoff. Back then, victory came easily for Mr. Macron. A big majority rallied to keep out the far right. This time round, things will not be that simple.
Let's get to some more of your feedback here on water. This person says Luxon is an idiot if he repeals the three waters. His argument that you won't be able to pick up a phone to complain if there is a problem under three waters is laughable. You try to get anything from the TDC now. Valerie's got in touch to say if your council's not delivering good water, you need to hold your council to account. Our council, Whangarei District Council, sorted out our three waters in recent years, and having paid for that, I do not want to pay again, says Valerie. On scam texts, one person is warning they've just had a scam text advising that they have a new voicemail from the doctor. They say, don't be sucked in by that one.
RNZ News at 6. Good evening. Kia ora tātou. I'm Evie Ashton. The National Party says the Kremlin's tit-for-tat response to sanctions proves that New Zealand's actions are important. The Russian government has released a blacklist of prominent New Zealanders, banning them from entering Russia. All MPs are on the list, along with Governor-General and various defence and intelligence figures. National's Jerry Brownlee says the response shows New Zealand's position does matter to the Russian President Vladimir Putin.
They're starting to get a message that even down in the far South Pacific, we don't appreciate what he's doing and would condemn the act of war that he's perpetrating on the Ukraine people.
Jerry Brownlee says it's past time for New Zealand to expel the Russian ambassador. Ukraine's President Zelensky says the destruction left by Russian troops in the town of Borodyanka is even worse than that seen in the nearby town of Bucha. Hundreds of people are feared killed in the strikes.
The work began with analysis of the siege in Borodyanka. It's much worse there. Even more victims of the Russian occupiers. And what will happen when the world learns the truth about what the Russian military did in Mariupol? The same cruelty, the same terrible crimes.
Russia has now been suspended from the UN Human Rights Council over reported war crimes in Ukraine. A charity that promotes sustainable trade is adamant that new legislation is needed to stamp out slavery and exploitation. The government is proposing legislation requiring companies to declare what they are doing to stamp out slavery from their supply chain. The CEO of Trade Aid, Jeff White, has told Checkpoint cheap goods are a big part of the problem.
Slavery exists because people don't want to pay someone a fair wage. No, that's what it comes back to. And child slaves are in there because they don't even want to pay someone a poor adult wage. So at the heart of slavery is people aren't paying the right price for the product.
Jeff White says steps should be taken to stop producers making such high profits. Two groups of doctors and teachers have lost a legal challenge against the vaccine mandate. The High Court has ruled mandates for both health and education workers is a justified limit on the Bill of Rights. In a 55-page decision released this afternoon, Justice Cook found the public benefit of a mandate outweighs any adverse effects. He also explicitly dismissed the applicant's evidence that unknown safety concerns relating to the Pfizer vaccine meant mandating it wasn't legal. The ruling follows a judgment in February which found the vaccine mandate for police and defence personnel unlawful. The Christchurch City Council says a group of anti-mandate protesters camping in earthquake-damaged red zone land have now been told to leave the area. The group has been camping at the site since the start of the month. The Christchurch City Council has said it needed to determine if the land was considered a park and therefore subject to the council's Parks and Reserves bylaw. The council's head of parks, Andrew Rutledge, says their legal advice is that the bylaw does apply and they have told the group they need to leave. In Dunedin, the City Council has given protesters in the Octagon until Monday to remove tents and other structures or be trespassed. The Minister of Primary Industries says a $13 million grant to a medicinal cannabis project will benefit the whole industry. The government is putting the money into a $32 million project by Puro, which grows cannabis on 10 hectares across 2 sites in Marlborough. Damien O'Connor says the grant is one of the largest to come from the Sustainable Food and Fibre Futures Fund.
All the information that we gather from this will be available to people who want to participate in the medicinal cannabis industry. That's unusual. Most of the projects retain the IP for one company, but part of the agreement here was that we would contribute on the basis that the wider industry gets the chance to learn the lessons from this program.
Damien O'Connor says the project will fast-track the establishment of an organic medical cannabis industry. Palmerston North real estate agent Andy Stewart says the housing market has turned quickly in favour of buyers. The latest QV house price index shows the price of an average home in New Zealand fell 0.6% in the 3 months to the end of March to just over $1 million. Andy Stewart says there are more houses for sale but a lack of first home buyers and investors. He says vendors have to be sharper when setting their prices or their houses won't sell. And a gunman who killed 2 people and wounded 12 others in a shooting spree in the Israeli city of Tel Aviv has been shot dead by police. The attack took place in the city centre in an area full of restaurants and bars. Police say the attacker was killed hours later in Jaffa. That's the news.
So hopefully in the next few months you'll see the English rugby team, women's rugby team with slightly better hair, inspired by the Black Ferns.
You are kidding me.
Matariki is underpinned by environmental awareness and associations and relationships with the environment.
Can't be bad.
You know, in a few generations, our descendants will look back and say, wow, that's a moment where we became of age as a nation.
Up to date if you're up late. Lately with Karen Hay every weeknight from 10 on RNZ National.
You're back with Lisa Owen on Checkpoint next. First, the short forecast from Met Service to midnight Saturday. For Northland, Auckland, Coromandel and Bay of Plenty, mainly fine. Expect the odd shower in Northland and the Coromandel tomorrow evening. From Waikato to Manawatu, including the Central High Country, cloud and a few showers are spreading north, clearing this evening, fine tomorrow. For Gisborne to Wairarapa, also Wellington and Horowhenua Kapiti Coast, fine today, partly cloudy tomorrow with isolated showers for eastern regions. Partly cloudy for Bulla and Westland with isolated showers in Bulla, clearing to fine everywhere tonight but returning there tomorrow afternoon. For Nelson, Marlborough, Canterbury and North and Central Otago, fine but there are a few showers about North Canterbury and the Kaikoura district this evening. They're clearing early tomorrow. For Dunedin, Clutha, Southland and Fiordland, cloudy periods and isolated showers retreating to the south coast tomorrow. And showers are expected in the Chatham Islands, turning to rain for a time this evening, possibly heavy with hail. It's 6 minutes past 6. I'll have news headlines for you at 6:30.
Nā mihi iwi, no mai hoki mai. This is Checkpoint, ko Lisa Owen tēnei. Modern slavery isn't just happening in dark corners in faraway places. The government is proposing a new law that could force companies to weed out worker exploitation and slavery from their supply chains, both in New Zealand and offshore, or face penalties. Chris O'Reilly from Kiwi Insights business Ask Your Team has been helping eliminate modern slavery from New Zealand organisations, setting up a platform where workers can use a smartphone to report abuse, and he joins us now. Kia ora, Chris. How widespread do you reckon slavery and exploitation is in New Zealand?
Well, there's quite a huge spectrum in terms of the definition of that worker exploitation, right to the far end, where we've had recent cases in the last couple of years. Joseph Matamata in the horticultural sector, literally enslaving tens of people for several years, large hours of work, not being paid for that. We've had instances of overseas workers on migrant schemes being locked into their employer, and in essence, having to pay back, having stuff taken out of their pay. So in essence, they were getting very, very small rates, right down to just the at-risk workers, often English as a second language, some of the hidden industries, cleaning, security, forestry, hospitality. It's a lot more widespread than people would think. International Labour Organisation estimate at least 3,000 to 4,000 in Aotearoa.
Okay, so one of the industries that I know has been looked at recently, construction, right? And I suppose some of the issues are the 6 degrees of separation thing. Someone could come onto your site, they could be working for a subcontractor, they could be being exploited. How do you wade through all those layers as a company to work out whether everybody who's contributing to your product is being treated right?
Oh, look, great question. And that's at the heart of the legislation. Basically, it's saying now you have to do more than just be sure that your immediate employees are not being exploited. You have to be sure that your supply chain and your subcontractors, those people that are working and supplying goods into your organisation, are ethical employers. And that's the key to this legislation. At the minute, the way that that's normally done is accreditation or self-assessment from those suppliers. We know that that's not good enough. We know that it's just not robust enough. We believe that the only way that you're going to be able to do that is have all of those organisations ensuring that every worker is getting an anonymous, safe way to tell the truth about what's exactly going on. But that's also really positive for the organisations. They can use that to make changes and make improvements. And we've seen that through some of the large-scale projects that we've done here in NZ, particularly in the hort sector.
So, I mean, undertaking your due diligence in your supply chain, what does that look like?
That means that you've got to make sure that your suppliers understand what the expectations are in terms of worker exploitation, and that they've got systems to make sure that it's actually happening. I mean, we think that employers think that they're doing well, but how do they know? How do they prove it? And that's what we've seen again through those examples and the pilots that we've had, where this anonymous way of getting workers to have a voice, not just when trouble's happening, but to explain what's happening all the time in terms of areas of pay, treatment, accommodation, fairness, those sorts of aspects, sort of precursors, if you want, indicators to more forms of exploitation and abuse.
Right, so getting workers to speak out is fantastic, but not everyone is going to do that because of the circumstance they are in, regardless of whether there's an anonymous platform or not. There'll still be fear involved there. And so I'm wondering, the proposed legislation, can it actually make a difference? Will it be easier to hold companies to account, or is it lip service?
No, look, the way that the legislation here has leapfrogged some of the legislation overseas, which hasn't worked. Overseas, in the UK and in Australia, it's basically said you just need to do a high-level risk assessment. And that in the UK, that's as crazy as we've done a report, we're doing nothing, but that's our report. So the key is in what you said before, Lisa, it's about the due diligence, and it's meaning that organisations have to dive down deep in their organisations, and their suppliers need to do that to find out what's really going on. Look, even really good companies, really good employers, when they've run the ethical voice system that we've developed up, have found pockets of real issues that they had no idea about. They were horrified. So they were able to take action, make changes, and the workers see that. And so it becomes a positive continuous improvement rather than just simply a policing and audit process.
Yeah, tick box exercise. So one of the things that the government is asking for people's opinions on is whether there should be penalties in essence. So companies that are found to be short, should they have to pay up in some way?
One of the things I really like about the proposed legislation is that it talks about it's a journey. And we've got this, we're dealing with a couple of overseas retailers at the moment that are looking to put the ethical voice system in, and they're saying, we're not expecting perfection. What we want is transparency and proof that changes and improvements are happening. And I think that's the sort of the flavour and the indication of this legislation, Lisa. It's about taking people on a journey. So initially, as long as people are doing what they can to identify issues and address them, and then ongoing, how can they protect their people and their business and their brand? That's the way to go. So I would expect that there's a degree of leniency and support rather than just coming in with the stick, which just means it's a compliance jack sort of boot approach, and that all that does is drive evasion. And what I really like in this legislation is this view of partnership, identify and improve, and then if it's transparent, then we as consumers, we can reward those organisations that are doing well. As the retail chains, they can purchase off those organisations that are better. Government has a huge role to play in this. Their procurement needs to be more than just lowest cost, because that actually drives behaviour that can be exploitative. So what are the ways that are happening, and they can reward the organisations that are being transparent?
Really appreciate your time, Chris. Thank you very much for joining us. That is Chris O'Reilly speaking there. In breaking news, police have confirmed to Checkpoint a stabbing incident at St Paul's Collegiate in Hamilton this afternoon. The school went into lockdown for a short time at around 3:30. 2 people have been injured and taken to Waikato Hospital. One of the injured has since been arrested. A decrease in house prices and an increase in supply has turned the market in favour of buyers. But with the average house in New Zealand still costing $1 million, it's not easy to get a foot on the property ladder. Jimmy Ellingham reports.
The latest QV House Price Index has recorded its largest quarterly drop in a decade of 0.6% in the 3 months to the end of March. But that's cold comfort for the likes of Palmerston North man Fraser Gregg and his family, who are looking to buy their first home. For Fraser Gregg, it would take a market collapse or change in the rules to allow 5% or 0% deposits before he can afford to start making offers again.
We went to a financial advisor last year and said, here's our situation, and his considered financial advice was, any rich relatives? Well, no, so we wait.
Mortgage broker and chief executive of Squirrel, John Bolton, says there are opportunities for first home buyers at the moment. In Auckland, new properties are no longer being snapped up off the plans.
Developers are struggling to get pre-sales now. That new build market, if you're a first home buyer, I think there's an opportunity there to get yourself into market at a much better price than you would have towards the end of last year.
John Bolton says the market began to shift in October and November because of the effects of tighter loan criteria and interest rate rises. He says there's uncertainty, but it's not going to lead to a crash in prices.
So we're in an environment at the moment where buyers have got the luxury of choice. There's more property on the market. Prices have softened a bit. You know, that's the argument for, you don't have to rush it, but maybe this is a good market to be back in and having a look.
Barfoot and Thompson Managing Director Peter Thompson says the easing of New Zealand's border restrictions will herald plenty of movement.
Over the next couple of months, we will see a slight drop in the prices, but with the borders opening, we're also going to see people both come back into New Zealand and also leave, and all of them acquire real estate of some form. So I think we'll see more activity.
Peter Thompson says the Auckland company's sales don't reflect the drop shown in the QV figures. Those figures show the average value of a house in Auckland is about $1.5 million. In Palmerston North, it's just under $750,000. Professionals real estate agent in the city, Andy Stewart, says the market's turned quickly, with many more houses for sale, but a lack of first-home buyers and investors.
The vendors that are trying to sell now are having to price their property to meet the competition if they want to get it sold. They really need to be a little bit sharper and clever on where they price the property, and the days of them getting the big prices, in fact, are just stopped.
Andy Stewart says buyers at the bottom end of the market are still finding it tough, although government restrictions on lending practices will ease from June.
It's 17 minutes past 6 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. Pack up and leave or we'll move you on. That's the message from the Dunedin City Council to a small group of protesters that have occupied the Octagon for almost 2 months. The group began the occupation on February the 11th, ostensibly in support of the larger anti-mandate protest in Wellington. But as Timothy Brown reports, with most mandates lifted and the council's vaccine pass requirements scrapped, they've now overstayed their welcome.
The Dunedin City Council has issued a directive to the Octagon protesters to remove their tents and signs and stop lighting fires or be trespassed. They've got until noon on Monday, when council staff, assisted by police officers, will move in. Dunedin Mayor Aaron Hawkins says he hopes it won't come to that.
We're encouraging them to leave voluntarily, and I know police will be working with them over the weekend to encourage them to make that decision. No one wants to see confrontation in the middle of the city centre, but there comes a time when we're left with few other options.
But it's fair to say the protesters haven't taken the message well, interrupting an interview of Mr Hawkins by Newshub.
Why are you wearing a mask, Aaron? Why are you wearing a mask?
And as the mayor left the lower Octagon, the words became even uglier. But Mr Hawkins is philosophical about the situation.
They weren't particularly enthusiastic about my presence in the lower Octagon, speaking to media who they are equally sceptical of. People are angry, and that isn't allowing them to be the best version of themselves, I don't think. But it isn't something that particularly concerns me.
And he wasn't the only subject of their ire. The police were called when the removal of a portaloo led to a confrontation between the group and the worker who came to collect it. Senior Sergeant Anthony Bond says a woman confronted the worker and started hurling abuse. An 8-year-old boy then kicked the worker in the leg before running back into his tent.
They were unhappy that their toilet facilities were being taken away, but obviously the council and the business that was supplying that have decided that they've had their time, and as a result it's time to move on, and so the council's turned off the power and that portaloo's been taken away.
He says the police are still investigating the matter and are yet to speak to the young boy and protester. The Dunedin group is the last of the occupations which was set up in the wake of the convoy and protest at Parliament in early February. It hasn't attracted wide-scale support, with the number of occupants generally staying in single figures. Senior Sergeant Bond says the council will be leading any trespass action, but police officers will work with them.
The council will take the lead with removing the structures, but we will be there as a presence just to ensure that the peace is kept. It doesn't become hostile, and to ensure the safety of all those present.
The council had required vaccine passes to enter its public facilities, but that requirement ended on Tuesday. A group of protesters met with the police this afternoon. When Checkpoint visited the Octagon today, there were about a half dozen protesters who did not wish to speak to us. But the protesters did provide a statement saying they wanted an end to all COVID legislation and vaccine passes, even among private business. One protester, named Chrissy, told RNZ yesterday she intends to stay.
No, I'm not just prepared to pack up and go, not until we, at the very least, get some kind of acknowledgement from our elected officials. It seems that we've just been all brushed aside as if, we're not important. We might as well be invisible. There's a lot of harm that's been caused to people.
There are rumours of reinforcements showing up over the weekend. So while a repeat of the ugly riot which marked the end to the Parliament occupation seems very unlikely, it's still unclear what will confront council staff and the police on Monday.
The marine sector estimates it has lost $600 million worth of super yacht maintenance work and associated spending during the pandemic. The Marine Industry Association says that other countries are taking this work and we need the sea border to reopen urgently. Its chief executive, Peter Bushfield, told our reporter Amy Williams that it's not too late for New Zealand to get some market share.
Over the past 2 years, we would have normally expected over 1,000 cruising yachts and super yachts to visit New Zealand, and we've had less than 100 arrive, mostly through the refit provision that Cabinet made available for boats being delivered for refit but not with their owners on board, could get dispensation, and that's been very helpful to our industry to keep it going during that period. But we're down about 90% of what the normal business would be, and we're estimating that during the America's Cup, during that period as well, that we've lost over $600 million worth of foreign exchange earnings and work for our skilled tradespeople in refitting and servicing these visiting yachts.
And what's the state of the marine sector now?
the industry has been majorly hamstrung by the restrictions of COVID, which is understandable for a period of time, but we're now behind the eight ball. Australia's seaboard is now open, Tahiti is open, Fiji is open, and these countries are promoting with their government support worldwide that they're open for business. And with New Zealand, we have to keep on saying we're closed for business.
What would you like to see happen from here?
Well, we're advocating to the government that we need to know now. We need to know in the month of April to salvage the 2022 season. The season is from May through to November when these yachts can come through the Pacific to avoid the hurricane season. And planning's already too late, but we'll get some of the boats that were planning to come to Tahiti, Fiji and Australia and get some market share. If we let them know right now, we'll be able to salvage something of the season and get these boats to do a U-turn and not go to Australia and come to New Zealand instead. But if we don't, we've lost that business to a competitor across the ocean.
That's the Marine Industry Association Chief Executive Peter Busfield talking to Amy Williams. To Russia now, where measures against the super rich have yet to change the course of the war or make them publicly challenge President Vladimir Putin. CNN's Nina De Santos explains.
Another week, another sanctioned asset seized. On Monday, Spain took possession of this super yacht, the Tango, owned by tycoon Victor Vekselberg. The seizure follows others in France, Italy and the UK. But now, in the invasion's second month, experts acknowledge that pressure on Moscow's once omnipotent oligarchs is having a limited effect.
Now, I, for one, would certainly like to see a much more vocal community of oligarchs using what little leverage they have with Putin to at least make him understand the misery he's inflicting on Ukraine.
Do you think you'll see that?
I think it's pretty unlikely. We've seen what happens if people cross Vladimir Putin, and these individuals who are being sanctioned won't want to go the same way.
Last month, Russia's president, a man accused of poisoning his adversaries, which he denies, said traitors will be spat out like flies. The US, the UK and the EU have together sanctioned over 1,000 Russian elites and defence firms, making it illegal for Westerners to provide them with cash or services. Yet only a handful have so far spoken out against the invasion. Bank boss Mikhail Friedman and the aluminium magnate Oleg Deripaska, both under sanction, have broken ranks with the Kremlin and called for the bloodshed to end. Friedman, born in Ukraine, says he has limited sway these days.
Just create enormous pressure for us personally, but we do not have any impact for political decision.
Their line has been that they have no influence, so they're innocent in all of this. I don't think many people believe that.
Former government officials like Anatoly Chubais and Arkady Dvorkovich have let it be known that they are against the events in Ukraine. Neither agreed to speak to CNN on camera. Roman Abramovich's attempts to mediate in peace talks haven't stopped his prized Chelsea football club and a fleet of boats from being hit either, as he now tries to sell the team. He's denied links to Putin, saying none of his activities merited sanctions. Public opinion is certainly souring against Kremlin-connected cash, especially here in prime parts of central London. This mansion behind me was broken into by squatters who made their way up onto the balcony and unfurled a sign in protest at the war in Ukraine. The reason they said they targeted this particular edifice was because they believed it to be owned by a Russian oligarch. That oligarch, Oleg Deripaska, recently said, quote, all sides would lose out, with tragic consequences for the entire world.
I think when it comes to sanctions on oligarchs, they are frankly symbolic, they're totemic. They of course keep the issue in the public eye.
So in essence, this is a PR exercise?
It's definitely a PR exercise.
Authorities appear to be aware of this. On Wednesday, the US said it will now target the assets of Putin's 2 adult daughters.
There have been weeks of protests in Sri Lanka calling for the country's president to resign because of the worst economic crisis in decades. People are struggling and without power, food and fuel. The ABC's Avani Dias has more.
Around Colombo after 5 o'clock on any night of the week at the moment, Sri Lankans who've just knocked off work are taking to all corners of the city to protest. There have been more than 100 rallies in Sri Lanka since last week. Kanya De Almadia says she's joined the demonstrations because the country is in crisis.
Without power, without electricity, without fuel, I mean, as you can see, that people are really struggling to live.
2 people have died waiting in line for fuel. The country can't afford paper for school exams, and Sri Lankans go without power for hours every day. Ithamal Goda drives a trishaw around Colombo.
Today I am all together collected only 1,000 rupees. That's not enough for my family. No dinner, only breakfast and lunch.
Sri Lanka can no longer pay for imports of basic supplies because of its huge debts to countries like China. Economists say this crisis has become worse because of years of government mismanagement, which led to ongoing borrowing and tax cuts, combined with the decimation of tourism in the pandemic.
The demand on the streets is largely that the president needs to step down. We can't expect the institutions that got us here to pull us out of this mess.
One family holds power in Sri Lanka. The president is Gotabaya Rajapaksa and his brother Mahinda is prime minister. They say they're not to blame for this situation. But protesters demand they resign. And while the president has defied those calls, experts say Sri Lanka cannot afford an election right now. This week, dozens of cabinet ministers stepped down, and the government has now lost its majority in parliament.
One listener, John, has got in touch with an interesting concept. This is about Russia and the list. You know, Russia's put this list out banning Jacinda Ardern going to Russia. John says, I suggest that we start a list of those who would like to be barred from Russia. A volunteer list of 1 million or more would make a statement and gain some publicity about how we are feeling. On the subject of slavery, Ingrid says that slavery in New Zealand includes bonded labour on orchards and dairy farms. And someone else says, totally agree with this legislation and that they have tried really hard to purchase only ethical items for about the last 5 years, they say. That is almost all we've got time for. The Late News team's going to keep you updated throughout the night. If you missed anything on Checkpoint, check us out on Spotify, Apple or wherever you get your podcasts. Dan Carter is 30 minutes and about 20 goals away from finishing his 24-hour kick-a-thon. His goal was to kick 1,598 goals. We can tell you that Dan is on target. He's kicked 1,578, raised over 324,000 for UNICEF. He's kicked the equivalent of 37 kilometres. Go, Dan.
RNZ News headlines at 6:30. Kia ora tātou, I'm Evie Ashton. Councils in Dunedin and Christchurch have given anti-mandate protesters deadlines to leave sites they are camping on. A charity that promotes sustainable trade is adamant that new legislation is needed to stamp out slavery and exploitation. The CEO of TradeAid, Jeff White, told Checkpoint cheap goods are a big part of the problem.